You threw at me, Madam CEO, was what did I consider could be taken out? But I'd like to throw that back at you. And what does management think can fall out of this when you add excesses to already stretched budgets? There are implications, obviously, for ratepayers. And I hear Mr. Drew say that we've saved 170 odd grand, but is that really the best that the senior management team can do?
In the last 2 years, we've pruned back about $1 million, I think, from our operating budget. I guess the implication is not so much. Well, it is obviously a reduction in costs, but it's more a spreading of the workload out to following years. So, for example, where there may be an expectation that a plan change will be worked up and put out to the community, as an example, in the coming year or in 2015-16, it may be that because the work has to be delayed or programmed over a longer period, in the case of, for example, some of Ian's team doing their scientific investigation, then gets stretched out. So then the question you have to ask yourselves is, well, we're already facing pressure from the community over whatever the issue may be in that area. It could be water security, it could be water quality. How do we balance that with our need to get a new regulatory framework in place sooner? So it's very much a balancing act. It's not so much, in my view, cutting services. It's cutting it's slowing down the rate and the way in which we deliver them is the issue, or the implications out of some of the decisions around rate increases.
Just a comment really, but I'd like your reaction to it, I guess. Local government is often, and as Councillor Bevan has said, it'd be good to have our rates to the CPI. But local government, by its very nature, has to deal with a lot of things that are not in that CPI. The building index, for instance, the cost of that. And the work that we do on the regional council, there is a lot of work that comes into that, and that's a lot higher than the CPI. Would you just further comment on that?
Yes, Councillor, I'd agree with that. Unfortunately, Mr. Adey's not here today, but he did some work last year around exactly that issue and looked at the inputs that go into the costings of contracts, particularly around some of the asset management work that we do, and it's the rate of increase or inflation on those are significantly different to the CPI, significantly above it, and in some ways we're captured by some of those costs in particular.
Just to follow up, I suppose, to comment to that, is that's the sort of thing I think that maybe needs to get out there in the public, that we're not actually dealing with the price of food and things like that are actually included in the CPI. There's a whole lot of other things. And it'd been good to have that building, is it the building index inflation? It'd be good to have that figure as well as the CPI, just to know where the real aspect is with us setting the rates.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dick.
Mr. Chairman, there's another element, that is the fact that we are creatures of statute, and we're obliged to do what our political masters in Wellington require us to do, and issues like air quality standards and new freshwater quality standards, whilst they carry obligations and costs, and whilst we take them on willingly because it's our wish to improve the environment, those are real costs and they can't be ignored, and they're over and above costs that have occurred in the past.
Another round of questions. Councillor Graham, you're deep in thought there. Councillor Belford.
I just want to make sure I do understand something that Councillor Graham raised. On page 94, there's a reference to HBRC saying they'll require additional funding from the council after blah, 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 blah. So if HBRC comes back asking for additional funds, that does not have a rate impact. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if HBRC do approach Council for additional funds, it comes out of the capital account. And it depends on the terms and conditions of that fund transfer. If it goes across at no return, then of course it will have an effect. But the proposal is to get increased dividends to cover that cost of capital, and there's been a lot of discussions in the past to ensure that that happens, so the impact on the ratepayer is minimised.
Further questions? Councillor Pipe.
Just with regards to your recommendation, I mean, I personally think that we wouldn't want to go above the rate increase that has been suggested. But with regards to that, there are we heard presentations by the economic development team, and we also heard presentations by Hawke's Bay Tourism. Is there flexibility in actually maybe looking at those figures that we that are put down in this report as to the contributions to those two activities, which are pretty closely linked?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, this paper does propose that the economic development additional funding of 107 is approved, whereas tourism additional funding anyway is zero. I mean, I put that in to be fair because I picked up I thought I picked up an opinion from councillors that the contribution to primary industry in the area of economic development seemed to have a higher rating than tourism, but I may have misread the extent of that, because I have actually said economic development should get the 107 and tourism shouldn't get anything. I think it would be worth discussing whether, if there was something urgently needed in tourism and there was a huge justification for it that didn't sort of sweep through during the workshop, maybe that could be approved and a modest amount could be taken out of economic development. I mean, instead of getting 107, maybe they get 20 to 30 less or something like that. I mean, there is always this judgment that could be made by councillors, and certainly that's part of today.
That's a discussion. Well, I don't know if we're going to nail that today, but we certainly, when we set the final draft, it'll be pretty clear what's happening where and how things will be allocated. So we're still building this up, obviously.
Okay, so just a bit of guidance from you. Where would that discussion take place, and at what particular point?
Well, with a bit more vigour, I suggest at the next council meeting, because that's the final. We sent an indication today back to staff to work through a final document, which is crucial to the final discussion, and then that goes out after us endorsing it next month. It then goes out to the public for their view and their feedback. Councillor Scott.
Mr. Chairman, might I remind you that the final vigorous debate takes place after the hearing, so June.
June is the last hurrah. Councillor Dick.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think the approach that Mr. Drury's taken is an appropriate one, because there may well be other approaches from external organisations for assistance or funding, and so it's appropriate that Hawke's Bay Tourism, their request is debated alongside other requests should they be forthcoming, rather than in effect giving them an advantage because they came along early. And I'm not saying that in any way and denigrating the worth of their work or the merit of their application.
No further questions. Someone happy to take us to the resolution then? Sorry, Councillor Hewitt, are you good? You happy to move? Make a start on this process. Someone happy to second that? You happy to second that? Thank you, Councillor Bevan. You wish to speak?
Mr. Chairman, this does sound a larger than we had hoped for rates increase. It's certainly better than the 7% on over 7% that was looking at us, and that's without all the requests that will come in from very worthy people wanting support for very worthwhile community activities which do contribute to the overall well-being of the community. So it is always a balancing against the needs of the community with the practical management of our core duties. There has been questions raised about the previous decision as to whether it was poor fiduciary duty. That may or may not be, and I'm not going to state what my position was on the time. Anyone can go and have a look at the record if they wish to. It's a collective decision of the council, and councillors have to learn to live with the collective decisions of the council, whoever they may be. So at the time that decision was made, because it was felt that they were still coming out of a recession, and I think we have to be mindful of the fact that the impact, though, whether we're in a recessionary time or in a time of prosperity, does impact on the vulnerable people, which are the low-income families and the elderly on fixed incomes but rising needs, which all have a cost to it. I do think it is worthwhile to consider this in absolute terms. 20 cents a week is probably not a particularly large increase for most people. And I think that if we have to look across the board, that actually the impact on some of the lower rate payers will be well under that. Also, they have to be mindful of the impact on some of our bigger rate payers will actually be significant. We'll be talking in terms of hundreds of dollars rather than, what was the figure put, $10 or $11. We've been asked what we can cut. I think Gisborne is going through this heart searching at the moment, and they're cutting essential services like pest control. Heaven forbid that we should go down a path of cutting some of those really important services, and I doubt that any of our ratepayers would look at us cutting our levels of service on flood control. In fact, they have asked us to increase it. So Mr Drury is quite right that he says when we go into the LTP we are looking at some increased costs, because one of the things that we consulted on last time, in which the indication was yes to go ahead with increasing our level of protection from a 100-year protection to perhaps a 500-year protection, which has got quite significant impacts, as was explained in the LTP at the time. You know, what are our luxuries? We've indicated that perhaps we will not support the Cricket World Cup, and I do have a worry about things like that when Tourism New Zealand is actually not only approaching us but every council, so it's double dipping, if you like, that the ratepayers would have to pay twice for it. We've got some luxury projects still on the books, like the Tamata Education Centre. Very worthwhile projects, and we've decided to support it, but are a luxury that the ratepayers can't afford? And these are the sorts of decisions, quite frankly, that our ratepayers, that's why we go out for consultation, to give our ratepayers a chance to be able to say where they do support service over and above what we already offer. So I'd also like to remind people that our general rate is actually heavily subsidised by our investments, and that we are very fortunate to be in that position. Those investments are held by and on behalf of the community, and we want to see that investment does continue to subsidise that work going forward into the future for future generations as well.
Thank you. Councillor Bevan, you wish to speak?
Very briefly, Chair. I'm happy to second this because it's a step in a process. It's not the last opportunity we'll have to visit these figures. I would like to think that we'll get some good and robust feedback from the public about this before we come back and discuss it further.
Councillor Belford, excuse me.
I just want to comment a bit further on the dynamic spreadsheet issue. I didn't propose that we have a capability to, on the fly, assess the value of service reductions and so forth. All I'm suggesting, and I think based on my observation of presentations at other budget submissions of this council, we'll probably have more people coming in who are seeking money than are complaining about the level of rates, frankly. And all this system that they use in Hastings does is simply enables you to say, okay, if we have 23 requests for additional funds, whether they are $15,000 or 150,000 or 1.5 million, if we were to approve it as we sit here and have this discussion, what's the impact of approving it on the general rate? That's all. And you can see instantly what the impact of that is, and whether it's creeping up to 7 or whether it's down at 4, or where are you in a sort of dynamic process, because typically the effort is to close the discussion at the end of that day and have a reasonably good understanding at the council where we actually wound up. So I don't see that kind of a capability as being a Herculean lift, and I think it would be helpful as we have to weigh against 30,000 here or 50 there, or should 30,000 go to cricket versus 30,000 to something else. It makes it a lot easier.
Mr. Chair, I would love to have done that process because I think then I would have felt more part of this process. I can't support this because I don't understand the process. I don't understand all the issues. I don't think that we have done the cost cutting that we might. I don't think that we are looking at our income, dividend from whether it's rates or from dividends, our capital, and how we should mesh that up. And that sort of process would be incredibly helpful, because I remember we sat around doing this planning. I remember Councillor Scott saying, and we're all just new here, and we're thinking, oh yeah, these are all great things. And I remember Councillor Scott saying, you must remember this will have a big impact on the rates. And I thought, actually, that's right, you know. This is not a great forum for debate. It's not. So I'm battling with that. But that would have been a tremendous vehicle for me to get a handle on the numbers and where we can cut costs and what we can do. So I'm not able to support this, and I'm not going to.
Thank you. Can I just perhaps add something here? And the point has been raised. Have I taken an opportunity to speak? The point has been raised. We are dealing with consequence, perhaps, of saving 15 cents a week last year to putting it up 20 cents a week this year, and the quantum is material, because that does affect people at my end of the region. It does affect people in other parts of Hawke's Bay. So if one thing comes out of this, if we agree to start at this point and begin this process in a more rigorous manner, I think that the fact that what we decide here today does have an effect on everyone in Hawke's Bay, as it has done in every other year, is useful. And I think it's a good part and a good point to kick the discussion off at, that while we want some things to happen, while we want to see some development, we want to see some leverage support here and there, we're not here to accept a procession of people wanting money to do things. We need to digest that. We need to work our way through all those issues. We need to look at how people are presenting and what their focus is and what their outcomes are and how they affect and help our community. But ultimately, things are pretty tough trying to get this thing back to where it was as far as the LTP discussion went. Whether we get there remains to be seen, but I will support it at this stage to get us back on track. So.